Hello and welcome to the JW Thoughts channel. My name is Wally and today we are back in the saddle. We are getting treated to an absolute delight of a JW broadcasting episode. Now, we haven't had one in a bit. I think it was May since we've had a proper JW broadcasting because they released the Gilead graduation and then all of the convention videos. So they have a little bit of a hiatus and they have come back in rare form. The talk that Stephen Lett, which will be the subject of this video, talks about, and the subject matter of apostates and why you should be listening exclusively to Watchtower is astonishing.
Obviously, even now, Jesus fully trusts the faithful slave. Those are both bald-faced lies. And apostates will give us absolutely nothing of value in exchange.
It really just took my breath and mental bandwidth just to not yell and scream as I was watching it. So I think it is going to go down in history as the worst, at least up to date, the worst JW broadcasting we've ever seen. And I think it's indicative of just what the state of Watchtower is right now. They've gone through the pandemic and now they are really feeling the effects of people being away from the congregation and always being on that hamster wheel, just completely burning themselves out and finally taking a breath and relaxing and realizing, maybe this would be a good time for me to actually address some of those doubts that I have. Maybe this would be a great time for me to do a little bit more research or self-reflection even and see what I believe. And I think Watchtower is feeling the effects of that. And people are voting with their feet. They are saying, nuts to this, we got to get out of here. And Watchtower is on full damage control mode. They, I think, are absolutely panicking. And yeah, I am all about it. I am here and I got my big old binoculars, I got my popcorn out, and we are ready for action. Anyway, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. Also, all further live streams are going to be on the JW Streams channel. That is going to be run by me and Alt Worldly. So if you enjoy Jake's content as well, subscribe to his channel, subscribe to our new live stream channel as well. With all that being said, sorry for the long intro. I know you guys are hyped. Let's get into it.
The theme for this program is, as Jehovah's sheep reject the voice of strangers. It's estimated that there may be 15 million animal species on Earth today. But of all these animals, which one is most often used in the Bible to represent good people? Sheep. Jesus often used this illustration. Here are 3 examples. First, to his 12 apostles, he said at Matthew 10:16, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves. Second, regarding what he'll do shortly before Armageddon, he said at Matthew 25:32 and 33 that he will separate people one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. In subsequent verses, he describes how the sheep will inherit everlasting life, but the goats will depart into everlasting destruction.
Now, it's important that we understand something right from the jump here, and that is he is trying to set up this good versus evil mentality, this us versus them, and you have to take sides, you have to choose. So we're really getting the heroes and the villains made out to be clear for us. So if you want to be part of the hero group, the good guys, you need to be a sheep. And he's going to talk about it a little bit more here on why it's so appropriate that they use sheep. But I did think it really funny right in the beginning. He's like, we have all of these different types of animal species. And yet in the back of his brain, it's like, and they all came about since Noah's flood. Those two things match perfectly with each other. Anyway, let's continue.
But a question arises, Why did Jesus use a sheep illustration to represent people who will gain everlasting life? Undoubtedly, because of the desirable qualities literal sheep have. Qualities.
Dang it, weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
They're gregarious, having a liking for companionship. They don't like to be alone. And it's a good thing, because without the flock and the protection of the shepherd, they're defenseless if a lion or bear approaches. About all they can do is bleat, "Bah." Goodbye, little sheep. Bleat, 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 bah, bleat, bleat, bah, bleat, 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 bah, bleat, 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 bah, bleat, 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 bah, bleat, bleat, bah, bleat, 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 bah, bleat, 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 bah. Goodbye, little sheep.
This whole bit about how fitting it is that he uses sheep based on their personality is really funny to me, because what would you actually expect if that is one of the main herd animals in the area? He's not going to be talking about alpacas, kangaroos, like... Obviously, that was common to the era and the location it was written in. This isn't like some sort of magical thing and oh, how fitting it is. You're looking at it from the wrong perspective. But obviously, they're not thinking too hard about who wrote the Bible, like the message it was supposed to have. Are we still up and running after ZZ lying on the keyboard? Yes, we are. And then the other aspect of this that is a little bit more interesting and kind of scary in certain respects is he's kind of talking how he sees ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses, right there at the end. And they're completely defenseless against any sort of attacks. And I think he does see ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses as completely defenseless and in absolute need of his wisdom and guidance.
Another good quality is that sheep as a whole tend to be peaceful, inoffensive, very different from goats. As little boys, my brother and I would pet the goats that my grandfather had. But if we turned our backs on them, one would often sneak up behind us and butt us.
He touched the butt.
For no reason. These are some of the desirable characteristics that make sheep an appropriate illustration for good people. But the quality we especially want to focus on is identified at John chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. When he, that is the shepherd, has brought all his own out, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers.
So now after we've had a bit of fun at the petting zoo, he gets into the real reason of why they think it's so great that they use sheep. And that is they listen. I wonder where he's going with this.
So what's the desirable quality? Sheep listen to the voice of their shepherd and reject the voice of strangers. Regarding this quality of sheep, the September 1st, 2004 Watchtower said this: "A book on Bible lands relates that a visitor once claimed that..."
Watchtower gives us the worst quotes, but this one, I just had to say something. A book on Bible lands once recalled that a visitor, even for something as inconsequential, it just feels like they're making it up. Like, why are you making it sound like this is coming from an authority? Like, just say, imagine if, at that point, because you're really just talking in absolute fairy tale language.
Sheep recognize their shepherd by his dress, not his voice. A shepherd answered that it was the voice they knew. To prove this, he exchanged clothing with a stranger. Dressed in the shepherd's garb, The stranger called the sheep, but they did not respond. They did not know his voice. Yet when the shepherd called them, though he was disguised, the sheep came at once. Please ask yourself, as one of Jehovah's figurative sheep, do I obediently respond to the voice of the fine shepherd and flee from the voice of strangers?
So he is asking these ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses, do you follow the voice of the fine shepherd? Now, the question really needs to be asked, what about you, Mr. Lett? Do you follow the voice of the fine shepherd as well? Well, as he says, let's talk about it.
Well, let's talk about this. The original stranger was Satan the devil. Like a ventriloquist, he made a serpent appear to talk, but the words were Satan's words.
Shut your eyes.
Satan thereby used his voice to slander Jehovah and deceive Eve. Today, Satan continues his work as an evil ventriloquist using not serpents, but human puppets to enunciate his voice, these acting as his agents, either wittingly or unwittingly.
So now the scene is completely set. You are a little piece in a game of chess between Jesus and Satan. And they don't use their hands to follow the moves, they use their voice. So make sure you can identify the voice of Jesus, so that way you don't get deceived and follow the voice of Satan. Now, obviously, we can't see Jesus and we can't see Satan, and this is going to cause a big problem because there's going to be lots of people that all claim to be speaking for Jesus. And Jesus even anticipated this. He said, many will come in my name, but how will you be able to identify them? By their works and by them sticking close to the words that I have spoken. So at least we have some type of benchmark so we can evaluate the rest of Stephen Lett's talk here and decide for ourselves, is he really on the right side? Is Stephen Lett indeed following the voice of the fine shepherd?
But now let's discuss 3 examples of how our fine shepherd tells us one thing, but Satan's underlings or strangers tell us something opposite. We must be vigilant to listen to the right voice. Our fine shepherd tells us, as our first example, these words at Matthew chapter 24, verses 45 through 47. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. We know the Master Jesus found the faithful and discreet slave spiritually feeding right-hearted ones in 1919, and at a future time will appoint him over all his belongings.
When he's saying this "we know" expression, I get very irritated because he's not explaining how we know that this particular verse in the Bible is discussing what would happen to a group thousands of years in the future in a very particular country, and that they would be a very particular branch of a very particular religion that would start talking and saying that they had the correct understanding of biblical scriptures. The Bible doesn't have anything to say about that. So when he's saying, well, we know this thing about the faithful and discreet slave, you have to read that into the Bible. The Bible doesn't speak for itself here. You can't just come out and say, well, we know and have proven that when it talks about the faithful and discreet slave, it's talking about the governing body. It doesn't make, the Bible doesn't say that. So it requires an interpretation. Well, golly gee, I wonder who's going to be giving us this interpretation. The governing body. Let's think back to that 2013 article in the Watchtower. And I remember this happened even while I was still a believing Jehovah's Witness, when they shifted away from the faithful and discreet slave being all of anointed Christians. They had preached that for a very long time. That's what the faithful and discreet slave was. And then in 2013, in this Watchtower article, they made a change. It kind of interesting because that was right around when they were well underway in changing the Bible as well. And they came out with their new version of the New World Translation, which was absolutely garbage. Now, around this time, you have all of these governing body members really trying to take control of this organization by changing the Bible and changing one of the core doctrines, in that the faithful and discreet slave doesn't encompass all Jehovah's Witnesses, because the Bible clearly says that they would be feeding his people. So therefore, it has to be the people providing the spiritual food. Well, who's providing the spiritual food? Well, that's the governing body. So Jesus clearly says that the governing body are the faithful and discreet slave. We can just laugh at that. I mean, that's hilarious to me, because the Bible makes no claims to such a thing. But it's really incredible to me how this is going to go right over Jehovah's Witnesses' heads. They are going to be like, yeah, we do know this. And it's very, I guess, dangerous when someone just uses this type of language. Well, we know this to be true, but doesn't actually take the time to show it. Because if you do take the time to try and show how the Bible proves that the governing body are the ones that Jesus is using, what you're going to have to do in order to reach that conclusion is trust the governing body's interpretation of the Bible. Logic.
So what's the implication? Obviously, even now, Jesus fully trusts the faithful slave. And all of us, even individual members of the governing body, should do the same.
If you are a believing Jehovah's Witness and you happen to stumble across my silly little channel, I just want you to take a second and read through those verses in the Bible and ask yourself if you agree that this is obvious.
Obviously, even now, Jesus fully trusts the faithful slave.
It's obvious that Jesus trusts the governing body based on those verses that he looked at. And then ask yourself, well, what other precedents can I find in Scripture in order to say, well, no, God is using the governing body? I'm using governing body and faithful slave interchangeably here because it needs to be. Because, again, in that 2013 Watchtower, they said the faithful and discreet slave and the governing body are one-to-one. So if you're believing Jehovah's Witness, just take some time and reflect on if this is an obvious point. And if it does seem obvious to you, then ask yourself how you reach that conclusion. Could you reach that conclusion without the governing body telling you that that is what is the case? Would you read those verses if you just... A man is born on an island, right? Do the thought experiment. And he never knows anything about the Bible. He doesn't know anything about the world. He doesn't have any presuppositions whatsoever. You get rescued from this island and you come to this big wide world and you hear about this thing from God and you're like, well, who's this God guy? And he has this book. So you start reading this book. Would someone from the island read those verses in Matthew and conclude, yes, that surely is talking about Stephen Lett, Tony Morris, David Splain, Kenneth Cook, Jeffrey Jackson, and Mark Sanderson. Did I forget one? Oh, yeah, Samuel Hurd. Is that obvious to you? And would any reasonable person conclude that? And if the only people that are concluding that are those that have been told that by those men, doesn't that seem a bit strange to you that the men that are using this verse and these verses to establish themselves at the center of an organization and say, no, Jesus is using us. Isn't it interesting that those men have to read it in to the Bible to get the power to tell you that they can interpret the Bible? Again, it's a circular argument that he's making here. Message over, I suppose, to those that are currently Jehovah's Witnesses, and how funny it is that this guy is saying even the individual members of the governing body need to listen to the governing body. Like, no one's buying this line, okay? No one in their right mind is like, oh yeah, look how humble you are. Oh, I mean, he even has the full-on rehearsed hand gestures here with the facial expression. Oh, even the individual members of the governing body humble themselves to the governing body. Do you think that they noticed? Yes, Stephen Lett, we did notice the trick you're trying to pull, and we are not fooled.
But what does the voice of strangers say on this subject? Don't trust the faithful slave. He will mislead you. And who often have the loudest voice promoting this false message? Apostates. Hebrews 13:9 labels false messages as strange teachings. Yes, they are the teachings of strangers.
No. Apostates aren't just yelling from the top of their lungs, don't listen to them. Because what would be the value of that? Do you honestly think that that's how I want to be spending my time and my life, is just yelling and saying, well, don't listen to them? Well, no, I'm not a fool. I'm going to try and make a point on and show clear examples of how the governing body, the Watchtower, whatever it might be, is not being truthful, is not being honest, that they're using manipulative language and tactics in order to entrap people mentally. So when he's created like the us versus them, right? So he's saying, well, this is us, following the fine shepherd, and that is, we can trust the governing body, and the governing body's good. Now, who's the evil person? Who's these strangers, these real hooligans? These are the apostates. Okay, well, as I said at the beginning, and I said it a couple times for a reason, the only way that we can evaluate these is, I would say, the Bible. And again, I'm not a believer, but I don't have any problem with believers or anything like that. So if you are looking at this, you would say, okay, well, who is following the fine shepherd? Who is the one that's actually showing that they're following Jesus? Obviously, you can't point at me and saying I'm following Jesus, but the points that I make aren't in any way watered down because of that. And I'll just give you guys a clear example. I've done this before, so I won't take too much time, but in the New World Translation, and remember, it's important because he's saying they're following the fine shepherd. They're listening to his voice. But I'm suggesting they're only listening to their own voices. And a clear example that I think is very easy to point to is how they have translated the Bible. Because once you get to the point where you can say, yes, I know the Bible specifically says this. I know that there's no evidence in manuscripts that any scholar would take seriously to translate it in this way. But our doctrine is more important than the Bible. That person is not following Jesus. They're not listening to the voice of the fine shepherd. They are listening to their own voice. And I think that a clear example is here in Romans 16, verse 7, where it seems very inconsequential. Greet Andronicus and Junius, my relatives and my fellow captives, who are men of note among the apostles, and who have been in union with Christ longer than I have. Now, again, I did a whole video on this, so I won't take too much time here, but there is no evidence in manuscripts to suggest that this name here, Junius, should even exist. It needs to be translated Junia. I won't get into all the details here, but basically it wasn't until the 12th or 13th century that some of the people that were making manuscripts and lexicons of the Bible, of those older manuscripts, saw this as a problem because Junia was a name of a woman. And they couldn't stomach the idea of a woman being counted as one of the apostles, a noteworthy person among the apostles, because they had this idea that God only uses men. And so it conflicted with their idea that men are number one. So what did they do? They started making funny and changing the text in order to read Junius. Now, the crazy part about that is that name Junius wouldn't have even been relevant in the time that this is purported to have been written. They wouldn't have been named Junius because the name for a man, Junius, didn't even exist. It wasn't until several hundred years later that it became common practice. And this is something you can do when you apply what's called form criticism to biblical texts. You can say, oh, this is an example of someone changing something later on because we know that name didn't even exist back then. So therefore, we can see a clear example of someone changing it. Watchtower goes even one step further and calling it who are men of note among the apostles. Again, that men there has no place. And most Bible translations, there was a time where they were all doing the Junius thing, and then once more and more discoveries of manuscripts came out, they were like, yeah, now we see it pretty clear. We can't hide behind this anymore. We're going back and changing it to the original meaning, which was Junia. What does the governing body do upon all of these discoveries? They stubbornly hold on to it and even add into it who are men of note among the apostles. So they go even above and beyond. Now, this to me is a clear example. It couldn't be any more crystal clear. It's not like this is my opinion. This isn't something that's up for debate. This is just clear demonstrable evidence of the Watchtower holding their ideas and their doctrine above the Bible. So when the governing body, the faithful slave, those claiming to listen to this fine shepherd, are telling Jehovah's Witnesses that they can trust them because they listen to the fine shepherd, no, they don't. And here's a perfect example. And if this thing is wrong, isn't it reasonable to suggest that there might be other things wrong as well, and it's at least worth investigating? And that's what's so important here. This talk that he's giving should be grounds for Jehovah's Witnesses to investigate, because if they're held up and held accountable for something that they're just getting wrong, and it's not, again, it's not up for debate. This is wrong, what they're doing with the Bible. I think you should hold them accountable and allow yourself the freedom to investigate even further. And what are they claiming? They're claiming I'm just sitting back, no more Watchtower, Watchtower's lame, boo Watchtower. Well, Mr. Apostate, why do you say that? Don't ask me questions about why I said that. Boo, Watchtower, boo, take them down. Is that what we do here on this channel? Or do we actually show examples of things? Do we actually break things down? I think we know the answer to that. So is the person, when he's describing these two scenarios of the stranger and the people and the fine shepherd, or those listening to the sheep listening to the fine shepherd, who's actually in the wrong and the right here? Couldn't you say, just based off of this evidence alone, that maybe it's the governing body that are that voice of the stranger, because they are saying nuts to the Bible, nuts to what Jesus has to say. It's more important to hold our core doctrines in place, and we are willing to either interpret or just change the Bible in any funny way we deem necessary in order to so it fits with our doctrine. And I know I keep saying it and I'm ranting a little bit here, but I think it's a very important point. When it comes to Watchtower, it's doctrine first, Bible second. And they're claiming that they are being led by the Bible. It doesn't work. You can't have it both ways. So sorry for the long rant. I know that was a real hootenanny, but I do think that this is really important and a very clear example of the governing body manipulating people. I think I can just come out and say that because the evidence is there. And whenever they're talking bad about me for being an apostate, they're not making a point. All they're just saying is, look at that guy. He's an apostate, therefore he must be bad. Well, why doesn't he go into a breakdown? Why don't you break down that point I just made, Stephen Lett? And let's see. How about you talk about that verse that I brought up? And yeah, we'll have a little challenge, and we'll see who sounds more reasonable when it's all said and done.
Some examples of their strange teachings are that the faithful slave protects pedophiles, or that slave will exploit you so they can live lives of luxury. Those are both bald-faced lies.
Now the entire world are apostates. I don't really get it, because an apostate is someone that leaves their former religion, and the people making these claims have never been Jehovah's Witnesses. I think that's why he's going to lump in people in media outlets as well, being controlled by Satan. But essentially, in Stephen Lett's mind, the entire world is out to get him and his buddies, when in reality, what people are seeking is the truth. That's all. You sit here on your tower of truth. Everyone walks around looking up to you, calling it the truth. And yet what people like me are asking is, what is the truth? And I won't dwell on this for too long, but I will put a link in the description of a newspaper article. It's the San Diego Union Tribune, and it's entitled "Appeals Court Scolds Jehovah's Witnesses Organization Over Failure to Turn Over Records." And in there it spells out how they are willing to have a $4,000 per day penalty to withhold some important records that the court requested. And yeah, you can read the article for yourself and draw your own conclusions about this and see, is this a lie that apostates are telling? And do the research, draw the conclusion yourself. Don't just listen to this person that, as we've already shown, is willing to hold his doctrine and his ideas of that doctrine ahead of the Bible itself.
Those are both bald-faced lies. Acts 20:30 says that apostates speak twisted things. They do this in order to draw God's sheep away and make them followers of themselves. Something that's twisted is bent out of shape or distorted. They speak twisted things by leaving out vital details, taking things out of context, or in some other way manipulating a truth into a lie or into a misleading half-truth.
The reason he is just saying these things without providing any examples is because he is someone that sees the world fundamentally different than most people. And he starts with a conclusion for his whole life. He starts with this conclusion that the Jehovah's Witness, the Watchtower organization, is the one true organization leading people to freedom and leading people towards everlasting life. And he starts with that conclusion and then fits the rest of the evidence inside that conclusion and ignores anything else. if he did have a different way of seeing the world, then he would be able and honest enough to have an open conversation, have a debate. Come on and have a debate with me, and we'll live stream it, and we can talk about some of these points. But no, they'll never do that because they are like completely closed off to the idea that they could be wrong. Where apostates like myself, we generally start by thinking, I'm probably wrong on this, and let me find evidence so I can actually draw a proper conclusion. And when we do that and apply that methodology to Watchtower's teachings and Watchtower's assertions, what do we find? That they're nothing more than those assertions. They're not actually based or backed up by any type of evidence. So that's why he can't go forward and provide examples. Now, let's say he could. Let's say he could point to an example of an apostate misleading people, intentionally and maliciously lying to the public in order to deceive Jehovah's Witnesses to follow him. Well, again, we can apply those exact same principles and start with thinking, well, I don't know whether this is true, and I don't know whether this is not true. And what I'm going to do is find evidence for it. And if he did give examples, then he would say, but when we look at the evidence, we find this not to be true. Well, he would never say such a thing, right? Because surely he would look very foolish if he suggested to Jehovah's Witnesses that, yes, you can look for evidence when it comes to the claims of Watchtower, and the answers you'll find will be satisfactory, and it will strengthen your faith. No, he's not going to say that. He's going to say, no, don't listen to them. Don't listen to those apostates. Don't just plug your ears. They're going to infect you with doubt, and they're lying to you anyway. Just trust me. Don't worry. Whereas a reasonable person would say, well, if they're lying, I will know that they're lying because I have the ability to think for myself. And again, you could apply that to Stephen Lett and co. If he's lying, you can look for the evidence and draw your own conclusion. But no, you must be a good sheep and follow. Follow who? Follow Jesus. Who speaks for Jesus? The governing body. Therefore, what Stephen Lett has just shown in this talk is that Jehovah's Witnesses are not to think for themselves. All they're supposed to do is follow the governing body. And why wouldn't they? Because what else is out there but a bunch of evil apostates that are just lying with misinformation? Again, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, do your own research. Draw your own conclusion. Because if it's true that apostates are nothing more than these malicious liars, and again, it might be the case that there are some, but to say all would just be fallacious. And if you pointed out the fallacious nature to said apostate, maybe you'll change their mind. But either way, you have absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. You will solidify and strengthen your faith beyond doubt, and you'll be ready for any test that Satan can throw at you because you did the hard work. Whereas if you never actually investigate these questions, if you just do the plug my ears and say, no, apostates are wrong, governing body good, you will never know for sure whether or not your beliefs are true or not.
2 Peter 2:3 says, they will greedily exploit you with counterfeit words. A counterfeit is something that's carefully designed to look like the real thing. Take, for example, counterfeit money. It might look genuine, but it's fake and thus worthless. If we're deceived into accepting it, we'll lose money. But if we're deceived into accepting the counterfeit words of apostates, we'll lose our life.
Here's where things get really ugly, in my opinion. We've gone full-blown cult mode now, because what he's saying here is that if you listen to apostates, you will die. I wish... You can't make this up, I suppose. He just comes right out and says, if you listen to the people that disagree with me, if you what he is saying here, what he is saying here is that if you listen to the people that would point out the flaws or the fallacies in the things that I say, you will die. Imagine the hubris it takes in order to reach that position. As again, we've established he is willing to put himself over Jesus and over the Bible itself by their goofy interpretations of things or in changing scripture altogether. So, because he's above the Bible, he's above Jesus, he is saying, if you disagree with me and the rest of the governing body, you will die. This is absolutely terrifying and disgusting. It's disgusting to think that my little innocent nieces and nephews are going to be sitting there and their parents are going to look over at them, my brother, and said, hey kids, did you hear that? Listen to governing body member Stephen Lett or you're going to die. Imagine growing up with that. I don't have to imagine. So if you're watching this as someone that's never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses or you came in later in life, we that grew up in it, we don't have to imagine. That's what we're told. And they're coming out and saying it in such a public way. And I have to say, I'm happy that this is coming out. I'm happy that they are talking in this way so publicly, because these are the types of things you would hear or would be kind of referenced in more of a private way. They would never just blast something out on the internet saying, hey, if you don't listen to the governing body, you're going to die. And they sound absolutely fanatical when they say that. And it's my hope that when people are hearing this talk, I know for me, when I heard the JW broadcast, I am going to sneeze. Yeah, so when I heard that JW broadcasting and it first came out, I didn't enjoy it. I found it to be something very strange and odd and unfamiliar, how in your face the governing body was. For those of you that caught the live stream I did over on the JW Streams channel, even when the two people came to my door and were trying to convert me to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or a Jehovah's Witness, and I asked them, who their leaders were, one of them pretended like she didn't know, and the other one looked at her and was like, well, of course we know exactly who they are. And no Jehovah's Witness is going to say, oh, I don't know who the governing body members are. What are you talking about? All of the convention, and they probably know who the helpers are at this point, and they probably have it all just down perfectly. They just see someone and they know exactly who they are and what committee they're on, because it's constantly being told to them. And I just find it to be really obviously gross and disgusting, because thinking, and your heart goes out to people that are Jehovah's Witnesses hearing this, and you're, wow, now you're being threatened with death. How much harder and more difficult is that going to be to mentally free yourself? But in another way, when things are so pushed to such extremes, it is, in my personal opinion, more likely that people that aren't so fanatical and so radical when it comes to being a Jehovah's Witness, and there are plenty of people that aren't just gung-ho, pioneer, elder, circuit overseers. There's a lot of mid-level people that just kind of go to meetings and go out in service a couple times a month. Those people hearing this are going to be like, huh? Oh, you're now threatening people with death if they disagree with you? And when he's saying apostates, again, it's just fear. But what he's really saying is the people that would disagree with us or point out the flaws in our teachings. And what we do is we point those out and we say, here's the evidence. Think for yourself. What Stephen Lett's saying is, don't think for yourself or you're going to die.
And apostates will give us absolutely nothing of value in exchange. Can you imagine really needing a loving shepherding visit and asking apostates to give you one?
Now, this is particularly annoying because who he's talking to have no experience with apostates. They don't have any point of reference. So he could literally say anything. He could say that if you asked an apostate for help with something or just some encouraging words, they will send you pictures of nudes. And Jehovah's Witnesses would just be like, really? Wow, that's what they do? Because they don't have any experience or dealings with apostates. Now, the thing with the actual real world is that you don't have to guess. You don't have to imagine. You can experience both sides. So go out and see if these apostates are that evil. And if they are, and they're just lying and they don't want to support you and they don't want to do anything for you, and if that's your reason for wanting to either be a Jehovah's Witness or not be a Jehovah's Witness is about the friendships, then okay, whatever. You can take that into consideration. But it has been overwhelmingly my experience after leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses that I have found people that are way more genuine, even people that I've never met in real life, that are willing to help and support you and just help you get through the day more than I would ever experience as a Jehovah's Witness. And it's a very simple sort of equation. Once you leave being a witness, you are now free to think for yourself and to live your own authentic life. You don't have to put up this fake facade of happiness where everything is hunky-dory. You're able to be truthful. You're able to be vulnerable. You're able to experience like real human emotions. And everything's not just, well, we're going to have the paradise in the future, so I feel fine. Which is all you get in Watchtower. And something I know I've probably talked about a little bit too much, but what will you get if you do get this loving shepherding visit? We already know the answer. If you call the elders, I could really use an encouraging shepherding visit. You already know when you make that call that you are going to get the same thing. Well, how's your study? How's your prayer? How's your meeting attendance? And how is your ministry? It's the same thing over and over. Rinse and repeat. And they never change it up. There's never like a new formula. They never come out with like the real razzle dazzle that says, oh my goodness, this is so encouraging. It's the same thing over and over and over again. And I would submit to you that that is not all that valuable. Someone just repeating the exact same advice over and over again doesn't really offer you any significant value. And the way that he condescendingly talks about apostates is absolutely absurd to me. Thank you, Zizi. Zizi's the #1 apostate mascot. He is the face of apostasy. Zizi, are you the face of apostasy? Yes, he is. Anyway, and you won't find an apostacat like this. Have we ever... I'm sure someone in the comments has said apostacat before. Zizi, you're an apostacat.
Similarly, we must be careful about believing everything presented in the media about Jehovah's organization. Remember, the media is commonly motivated by prejudice, hatred, and a desire for profit. False and exaggerated news reports are very common.
Again, do you see what he's doing here? Let's see some of these false and exaggerated news reports. Let's see it. Lay it out for us so we can evaluate the information ourselves. And until that, if you're going to be the one making the claim, if you are the one saying, okay, I would like to take on the burden of proof and make the claim that, yes, the media exaggerates and says false things about us, the burden of proof is now on you. I don't have to go out and try and find them. You have to provide an example. And if you don't, I'm just not going to ever take you seriously. It's not that complicated.
For example, in one European country, many people were indignant when an emotional press report stated that a young female witness died because she refused a blood transfusion. Were those the complete facts? No. The patient refused a blood transfusion on religious grounds, but she did agree to alternative non-blood medical management. This could have been implemented immediately and likely would have saved her life. However, the hospital delayed matters unnecessarily until it was too late. The press report didn't mention these facts.
So there's 1.5 million things that could be said and definitely will be said about this particular clip. But just to add my 2 cents into the old wishing well here, is that how easy it is when you think that your word is evidence. And I think that's what he's showing us. He's not actually bringing any information. He says, many people were disturbed by a person that refused medical treatment. And he's making all these assertions. Tell us the exact case. Give us the names of the doctors. Give us the names of the hospital, because what you're suggesting is that there was some kind of malpractice here. That's a huge thing to be saying. And that the media coverage of it didn't really get the entire story. So you're calling out not only the hospital and were they fulfilling their duty of care, but you're also calling into question the integrity of the people that covered the story.
While it's unreasonable to distrust all secular sources of information, we must be wary. 1 John 5:19 says, "The whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one." Now, let's discuss a second example of the voice of our fine shepherd Jesus.
Yes, it would be unreasonable to question all secular news outlets, which is just a bunch of code wording for saying, we will tell you which ones are approved or not approved. Or if you want to have an easy response to this, just say, hey, anytime there is something positive, you can trust that. And anytime there's something negative, you should be skeptical. Or if you even see the headline, you shouldn't even pay any attention to that. Now, this video has gone on far too long, and it's going to be like 4 hours long if we talk about this. So it is 8:42 now, so I need to start editing this video. So I'm going to call it quits there and start with the editing process. Now, I will be picking this up. Maybe we'll just do a series like kind of like the old convention crusade, and we'll call this the broadcast crusade. I'm a crusader. Team, now we know it's Wally the Crusader. We need someone who's a graphic designer can make a crest. So anytime we do a crusade. Anyway, yeah. So how about we will tackle? I did watch most of this broadcast, so I think we can actually tackle maybe the whole rest of the broadcast in the next parts. But there are a few interesting things, so we'll just kind of have to see how it shakes out. But this one has already gone on far too long. So thank you so much for watching, watching to the end especially. Don't forget to drop a like on this video if you're still around, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you tomorrow at 6 a.m. Pacifical time for part 2 of the worst broadcasting ever, brought to you by Wally the Crusader. Kind of sounds cool.